Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Sloppy Lab. This is Bottom of the Beaker, the show all about the design, docs, and KeyForge. No, and strategy of KeyForge. That intro is a little too complex for me. My co-host and I were talking just before the show about some of our favorite holiday traditions. With the holidays coming up, and he was mentioning that his family is really big into practical jokes, big practical joke family. And he's telling me that he's going to bring 4 of his chickens to the family gathering and write some numbers on the back of them, in paint or whatever. But not sequential, something like 3, 4, 5, 7, and then let them loose in the house and watch maniacally as the rest of the family looks for chickens 1, 2, and 5. That mastermind is none other than Quick Draw 3, 4, 5, 7. Oh, 6. Dang it. Did I mess it up? Oh, man.
That's a great idea.
It's a good idea.
It was too complex, but I appreciated it anyway. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think I might borrow that one. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of build up on that one. Chat was like, "Where's this going?"
Where are you going with it?
Where are we going with this? Yeah.
Very cool. So, did you modify the intro to say that this is a podcast about design, or has that always been part of that intro? I forget now.
It's been part of the intro ever since we had an intro, which is like 2 episodes, 2 or 3 episodes, 4, maybe 6.
Okay.
Yeah. Always had design in there. Totally.
That's it. No, and that's great because I've always had an interest in it, and you've always had an interest in it. And I feel like sometimes we kind of like gloss around the design part of it, but I think we're going to focus on it today, or at least a part of it.
We are, and hopefully our internet holds up. Mine's been a little bit dicey today, so if it's a little bit dicey, we'll hope that it's going to be all right and plow through. Fix it in post. But yeah, we have a super cool design-related topic to go through today. I'm super stoked for it. I think this has actually been on our list of topics to consider since we've had a list of topics to consider, or pretty close to it.
Yes, which was like a month ago, right?
Longer than that, Quick Draw. Longer than that.
Yeah, no. We're a little sloppy, but not that sloppy. It is. No, this is something that you put on there very early on, and we always just kind of like, oh, let's spend some proper time on that and like actually do some research on it. And we just kept kicking the can, and finally we were like, okay, like I think this is a good week for it. Did a lot of reading this weekend, and it's a super interesting topic. And the name is it comes from a Mark Rosewater blog post, and it's an odd name for like what it actually is. And I don't fully understand why it's called that.
Mm-hmm.
Lenticular design in KeyForge, and I looked up lenticular to see like, okay, how is this relevant? And it just has to do with like the eyes and lenses, and all of the references in the Rosewater blog were like to different cards in Magic that had the name lens in them, like Thran lens and some other things like that. But I still don't fully understand why it's called lenticular. Can you help me with that?
I can actually. So I'm sure you've seen things like this before. Maybe old cards you've collected, or like a billboard you've driven by. And if you look up close, it's got this like kind of ridged or jagged texture to it. And usually it's got like an image that you can see when you look at it one way. And then if you kind of shift your position, it seems to change and you see a different image. Like these holograms that like show you an action scene or something. Like when you're a kid, you've got this like holographic action card and you like turn it, you're like, oh, this is like the punch going landing or something. So it's this idea of like cards that take on different, or things that take on different meaning or like value as you kind of look at them differently.
Yeah. Very interesting. That's a very good description, a good summary.
Yeah, or it was completely like chopped up and served up to fit the needs. I'm not sure if that's what it actually means.
And just to push back on Murph a little bit, I am not I work in heavy distinction. I am not a translator though.
Okay. Good distinction to be had. We are very particular about our
Just need to get that out there.
about language and pronunciation and things here on the show. Yeah, so we are talking about complexity in the game of KeyForge. And it relates to this idea of lenticularity, which is another word I just made up because there are, from that article QuickDraw was describing, 3 different levels of complexity. And kind of the notion was that you can look at a single card and see complexity when you're at a certain level of understanding or not. And then once you've kind of reached a new level of understanding, you see different layers of complexity. And so it's this idea of designing for players in such a way that the complexity reveals itself as you're kind of ready to handle it or digest it. And you get some really nice things from that, which we can dive into as we get to them, I guess. But does that kind of make sense as a concept and how it relates to lenticularity, I guess?
It helps a lot for sure. You should be writing for Mark Rosewater, I think.
I'm probably just regurgitating stuff I read many years ago from him. I don't know.
Could be. I wish I could say that I read more of his stuff than I do, because a lot of his stuff is super interesting. I don't know. Is the blog still active, or is it kind of just like historical now?
It's been, I think he's still writing weekly columns. I think. I don't know. He also had a podcast that I followed for a long, long time. But yeah, I was reading his articles semi-religiously for a long, long time, listening to his podcast regularly for a long, long time. I couldn't tell you right now if they're both still going. I'd be surprised if they weren't.
Okay. Well, I dropped the link in the chat here on Twitch, and I'm sure our producer will drop the link into the show notes whenever this drops in the podcast format. Very cool article. Definitely recommend reading it, and we'll try to go over it and kind of how it relates to KeyForge as opposed to the article talking about how it relates to Magic the Gathering. So I guess a good place to start is probably to talk about the 3 different types of complexity that he breaks down in there, right? Mm-hmm. Comprehension complexity, board complexity, which is other articles and other places refer to that as tracking complexity, and strategic complexity. So I think a couple of these are good in our opinion. One of them is good in our opinion. The other 2 are generally in game design not as good. But let's start with comprehension complexity, because this is probably what everyone thinks of when they just hear the term complexity, but complexity has more depth than that. Comprehension complexity is simply just about, can you read a card and understand what it does or understand what purpose it serves? And I'm just going to kick this off with the comprehension complexity elephant in the room to me in KeyForge, which is key forgery. And think like everyone may have a similar card like this to them, but I have to forgery no fewer than 3 times every single time it hits the table, and read it 3 times again right before it comes into play, and I have to figure out what it does and what it means, because that card is just written in a way that is very difficult for me to understand what I am trying to do out of it and what are the consequences of my decisions, because it has 3 negatives in that card, like no or not, and there is 1 conditional, and there's just like 4 or 5 sentences in it. It's just very hard to understand. I don't want to read every card we're going to go through tonight, but I will read this one just once. When your opponent would forge a key, that player names a house. Reveal a random card from your hand. If that card is not of the named house, destroy key forgery, and they do not forge that key. No amber is spent. And it drives me crazy, because I can never remember, do I want to name a card that matches, or do I not want to name a card? And there's so many like negatives involved in this that, like, what are the consequences of doing this? Does the card stay on the board? Do I have to do that again next time? And I just never can remember for this one. So this to me is like the example to me of comprehension complexity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was the first card I thought of when we decided we were going to do this episode again, because I know you've mentioned before, as I'm thinking about it right now, like you just read it, I couldn't tell you. Like I couldn't tell you. I've played with this card many times. I've played against it many times. Every time I read it, and I'll be honest with you, if it's a casual game, I just pick a house. And I'm like, so what happened? So what happened? Yeah.
Then you forget that you have Gizmo on board, and like all of a sudden you click a house randomly and it's correct, and then the Gizmo blows up and the whole board's empty, and you have no idea why. You're just
Yeah.
like, whatever. I'll go
Hmm.
Brobnar.
Yeah. Yeah. There's man, we need like the personas coming out. There's Sweaty Zach, who's out there. Shout out to Sweaty Zach. There's also Sloppy Justin, and Sloppy Justin comes out sometimes in casual games when KeyForge is on board. I'm just like, you know what? I'm just picking a house, man.
Sunk cost, first house that I see, click,
Yes,
go.
totally, totally.
Yeah. So the comprehension complexity, though, like this is one where you can read it and you'd have no idea what's going on. But the comprehension complexity is not limited to this, though. Like another good example of like a different type of comprehension complexity I like to give here is training costs, the
Mm,
Winds of Exchange card. And this is like you read that and it's very clear what the card does when you read it, but it is still comprehension complexity because nothing on that card is good. And you would, as a new player, you would see this card and you would just have no idea why this is a card. It says training costs cannot be discarded from your hand except through card abilities. Play lose 2 amber if you do not shuffle training costs into your deck. So this is also comprehension complexity just because in the context of the game, you will see this card and you have no idea why you would ever want this card. And so, sure, it seems like a bad card, but you don't understand why it's there. And that kind of questioning is very difficult for new players as they encounter a card, whether they can understand what the card's trying to tell you or whether they can understand what the purpose of the card is. This is the case where it's the same type of complexity, but for a different reason.
yeah, another one that kind of came up recently in this bucket is the curse that makes you discard your hand at end of turn. And pretty much everybody who read this, the first time they read it at KFC, after seeing it in a menagerie deck, the reaction was, wait, so I get no hand for the rest of the game? Uh, and it's like, it's not, as the player who plays it, you're like, oh, maybe this is great. My opponent gets no hand for the rest of the game. But you're probably mistaken, or you are mistaken. They get a fresh hand at the end of every turn. And yeah, yeah, it was, I don't know, got a lot of reactions that ranged from like incredulity to vitriol as
Yeah.
folks are reading it for the first time. Yeah.
And that's an example of not just new players, like experienced players seeing a card for the first time and just having not really a good idea of like what it's doing. And that kind of complexity is generally not good. You want your players to understand what their cards are doing, um, and you want that depth as well, though. Like you want them to be difficult cards to play or cards that have like meaningful depth to them. We'll get to that in a minute. But I think, very importantly, as a game designer, you want your players to be able to understand what they're doing and not just kind of bust out sloppy Justin all the time because they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah. And especially this is detrimental to new players, right? Like, yes, it bites returners, but when you're in a position of trying to bring new players on, or even trying to like keep the rate of new players joining from falling, like this is the sort of complexity that can really bite you. And I think
Hmm.
from the articles that we were referencing, this thinking came about from the Magic the Gathering designers as they were looking at their numbers for kind of new player growth and seeing it dwindling and saying like, gosh, maybe we have an issue with this type of complexity. But on the flip side, we want to still provide a deep, like rich strategic experience for the players who are like ready for that and already there. We don't want to scare away folks who aren't ready for it, but we were going to want to provide it downstream.
Yeah. And like you mentioned that this is largely targeted at new players, which I think is true. But that doesn't mean it's not interesting to players like us as
Totally.
well, who've like been playing this game for a while and understand it. Kind of understanding why a card is designed and the kind of nuances that go into that design, I think personally is very interesting. And so there were enough rules in the lenticular design that they, as designers of Magic the Gathering, follow. And I think we can see of these rules in KeyForge design as well. And we also see some situations where a rule maybe isn't followed, and we see firsthand the negative impact that has on players, or especially new players, in the game. And one that you had mentioned to me before was rule number 5 from Rosewater was players will try to use the cards to match their perceived function. which basically means if you have a card that tells you to do to play it without really getting that full benefit, players are inclined to be like, oh, well, I'm going to hold on to that until I can actually use that. And that may not be the right thing to do strategically. And eventually they're going to get to a point where they realize, like, I've held this card the entire game, waiting for the right situation to use it, and that never came. And now it feels bad because I've never had a chance to play more cards or play this card because, I thought that I should have held on to this TMTP until they had like 7 or 8 or more than that. And they, didn't see the value in playing a TMTP just for an amber and then drawing another card and cycling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool.
There's a lot of other, I think, examples of the play effects like not giving you value right away. Like imagine if you have 2 alphas in the same house. AOA Brobnar is the one that comes to mind. And you have First Blood and you have Gargantus Crapper. And you are thinking like, oh man, these are both alphas. I should play one now and hold the next one for the next turn because you feel like I should play this card because it's a card. You don't really think about that. And so that kind of complexity for newer players when you're not following this design, I think leads to like more negative experiences, right?
Yeah, I think there's a balance there. Some of that I think can dip into potential for depth in the experience. Like I think the tension of like whether or not to play the TMTP now for a pip or hold it for later on can dip its toes into more of the strategic complexity camp. But I feel what you're saying in general for the feel bads on new folks. Yeah, you wind up feeling like you maybe didn't have a very fun experience or had a really interesting game because you were holding lots of cards to maximize their potential. Yeah.
But like you were saying when you were describing this design concept in general, is that you have to achieve new levels of understanding of the game to see other ways to play it.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it a little bit higher of a barrier to entry for newer players, but lots of depth for more experienced players. And so the challenge is, as a designer, you have to find the right way to balance those two things, where you make it approachable for new players, but also still provide that depth for experienced players.
Hmm. I like it. So let's talk about.
There were
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Go ahead. You want to hit on some of the other ones too? I'm sure.
There was a lot of other rules that I thought were interesting. We don't need to touch on them all. I mean, I would recommend everyone go read it, but it definitely made me rethink about like, you know, various KeyForge cards and are they following this rule or not, and how does that feel as a player, to have these more, comprehension complex type cards.
I will say it's very interesting seeing KeyForge as a relatively young game compared to Magic that shares a progenitor as a more established game, and seeing a lot of the things that early Magic did, KeyForge also doing, and some of those are good, some of those were maybe things that we learned later were not as great from experience. But I don't know. I'm not a game designer, but I also wonder if there's a lot of things that fall into this camp, like maybe some of the more comprehensive complexity type things, or things like that you take on almost as technical debt when you're making a game from scratch. And you're like, I have to make some big splashy stuff for folks to nerd about in order to actually get this thing off the ground, or what have you. And or it's just, maybe it's just not a worry. Maybe it's just not a worry yet because you're trying to bootstrap this game. But it's a thing that you have the luxury of worrying about once you've got an established player base and can start to think about, refining the product as opposed to just getting it out the door,
Yeah. As someone who played a lot of board games in the past and I don't play as much anymore, I've read more and more about game design, and I think that's made me a little bit pickier with the board games that I choose to play. And there are so many games that I just feel they're introducing this kind of comprehension complexity very early on in the rule set, and it turns me off from the game completely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just checked out, and I don't even I kind of write the game off. Maybe that's not right, but I just feel that one of your primary responsibilities as a designer is to make your game understandable to the players. And if I am seeing that fail like near the start of the rule book, then I'm pretty checked out for it, and I'm not interested in the replay value of that game.
Yeah, I think it definitely raises the bar. I don't. I mean, I'll certainly reach a point where I'm checked out. If there feels like there's a lot of setup or a lot of things that I need to digest before I'm really into the game, like it sets the bar for like how much fun am I having that much higher, if
Hmm.
that makes any sense. Yeah, yeah. So I feel that totally, totally.
Yeah. Okay, so second type of complexity we want to talk about is board complexity. I saw a few other articles that refer to it as tracking complexity. I think tracking complexity is a nice way, but basically it just means how many things are you trying to keep track of on the board at one time, and how many things do you have to remember about, you know, uh, changes to like the rule set or something that you have to remember to trigger at a very certain point of time if something else happens. That kind of complexity. Some examples that I thought were a lot of the Dark Tidings treasure artifacts, where
Mm.
you put the 4 amber on them, and then you have to monitor throughout the game until a certain condition is met, and you have to remember like to use it at that point. Curiosaurus, one of my favorite cards, is another one for sure because it really just changes the rule of the way that creatures work, and how that whole process plays out is definitely a negative turn off for a lot of people, because it is just like I have no idea what happens if I have Curia and Gateway and one creature with no amber on it that suddenly gets amber on it. You don't, there's these rules that go along with that. I consider that kind of the board complexity part. And then again, another Dark Tidings example, something like Mechabooey, where at the start of every turn you have to trigger something depending on a condition.
Yep.
Um, to me, that is also kind of that tracking or board complexity. Do you have any other examples of
I
this kind of
do. I mean,
complexity?
I think anytime you're really adding to the bookkeeping required to maintain a proper board state, this is where it comes into play. The one really bad offender to me is Killigog's Trench. And
Hmm.
this one gets me, not because it's hard to remember, I mean, any harder than anything else, but there comes a point with Killigog's Trench where you still need to keep track of the counters, or you're still supposed to keep track of the counters, even though it's not going to matter, right? Like at the point once you've hit 10 counters on Killigog's Trench, like you're not blowing up anything else, but you're still ticking it up every turn. And like, okay, it's fun. Like I've got 20 counters on this thing. If you're playing a game with me and it was a really grindy matchup, I'm forced you into a Heart of the Forest match, and you've got Killigog's Trench with 30 counters on it. That's sort of an opportunity from a design perspective to be like, let's give this an off ramp once it's no longer relevant somewhere, and kind of reduce the mental burden for the player to keep track of things. Um, this is interesting, and I'm going to ask you what your take is on leveraging tracking complexity or board complexity sort of as a tool in competitive setting. But I also think, along with things like Curiosaurus, along with things like Mechabooey, even just having a wide board, like a wide board can really level up the board complexity. Um, the one big offender to me. So we talked about Killigog's Trench as the big offender for me, as from a design perspective, but from a gameplay perspective, the one that gets me most often is Cloaking Dongle.
Hmm.
Um, and this one gets me. I will not see a Cloaking Dongle. Like if it's, I will attack the creature. I will sit there like what the heck happened, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's an exaggeration, obviously, but well, maybe not
Everybody
obviously.
forgets that card.
Everybody forgets
Yeah, I
that
mean,
card.
it's yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great example of it.
sure. And I think board complexity is, I think the level of board complexity is a thing that KeyForge kind of flirts with, being a little bit too high, if I'm being totally honest. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. So totally a bad thing, and we'll get back to that. But yeah, Cloaking Dog comes about to me. Any card or anything that makes me kind of stop and reevaluate everything before I take an action is a little bit tricky, right? Because you want to avoid nudging your players into feeling like they have to go down these deep analysis pathways to take different actions, like simple actions. So if I want to attack a creature, I'd really love to be able to narrow the like scope of things I have to hone in and worry about to that creature. Ideally, I mean, and most cases. So yeah, that's the one that gets me. But yeah, I mentioned that I wanted to ask you about how you thought about board complexity as a tool for players to leverage in a competitive setting, and what your take is on that.
Yeah, my answer is pretty simple in that I play Dark Tidings decks in Kagi for a reason, um, because they are complex and they are difficult for your opponent to fully understand. At least the ones that I like to play, they're often cards that they haven't seen very often. Um, I have an Evil Twin Calp deck with Whirlpool,
Mm-hmm.
and that throws people for a loop quite a bit. I have, the Tide Warp Mecha Buoy Static Collection Array in Guadalupe. That's also kind of like understanding what that means for like 2 turns from now and whether or not I should be raising and what their key cost is going to be, all kinds of things like that. So yeah, I mean, I enjoy this stuff because I feel it gives me an advantage. So I have no problem, taking advantage of this kind of thing. Like I mentioned before, Curio is one of my favorite cards. I love Curiosaurus decks, and whenever I get a Curiosaurus deck, I'm looking for very specific combos and interactions that I can try to take advantage of, that my opponent may not see coming. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it, and I have no problem with it in competitive KeyForge personally.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. Um, it's a Kagi match. Do you let me raise because I forgot to raise?
Give me an example of a different player. I will say I have had, and to be honest, like I have turned people down from raising like retroactively in Kagi before,
Okay.
and it was because they were playing a Deepwater Gruin. The tide was low. They gave me a crucial amber, and I was like, uh, it depends on the situation. Like if there is a time when I don't know, there are situations where I could say yes, but in a competitive setting, generally no. Like that's gained information, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If there is no gained information, then I'm more likely to say yes. But like that's an example. Often the tide racing example is one where it's like, you know, or if it's like a submersive principle and they like drop the submersive principle with the low tide and like, oh, I meant to raise it first. Yeah, like that's one where I'm like, okay, yeah, that clearly that makes sense, I think, because you just forgot it, and I'm more likely to allow for that.
Hmm.
But when they play Deepwater Gruin and they see like I gained one amber and they're like, oh, totally forgot about that, I'm less likely to be like, yeah, you can have a take back on that one.
I don't see the distinction between Gruen and submersive, but that's okay if it feels right to you.
I mean, I'm calling myself out. Like I've turned down that specific request before to take
Yeah.
something back like that. Um, I don't know. Maybe Chad will back me up on the distinction, but I feel like submersive principle example, it's pretty clear what that card does and what you're going for when you play it. And if your opponent only loses one amber instead of four, they're like, wait a minute, why didn't you lose four? Because that's like clearly what they were trying to do. But
Hmm.
the Gruen example, I think, is pretty rare that somebody plays or reaps with a Deepwater Gruen and gives their opponent an amber. That I think people just kind of forget about that interaction.
Interesting. Interesting. And then we had a comment from the chat about how this is not only, can you like mentally can you wrap your brain around the board state, but also, testing your knowledge of the rules, right? That comes into this 100% as well, especially when you're talking
Absolutely.
about Mecha Buoy, like it was mentioned in the chat, but also Mecha Buoy in combination with Tide Warp, in combination with Static Collection Array. All of a sudden, I think you've narrowed down to an embarrassingly small number of folks who are going to tell you how that works all the time correctly. Yeah,
Yeah. But I
interesting.
love those kind of games. Like I love that kind of decision making and planning, and as we'll get to it in a minute, that kind of strategic complexity that comes along with those cards and combinations. While they might be a bit difficult on the surface or difficult to track, like you can still have complexity that offers depth, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I love most about them.
Hmm. There's a great comment in the chat too. This is something that I will be guilty of, but getting caught up thinking too far ahead and losing track of some of the bookkeeping things. So I think that's part of the risk of having too much bookkeeping that routine bookkeeping that fades into the background generally, and then gets overlooked while you're going through performing some of the game actions that are part of the plan that you actually like quote unquote care about. So things like raising the tide can fall into that, right? You're like, yeah, I meant to raise the tide, I didn't do it because it was kind of in the background of the like bookkeeping that I just kind of overlooked. Interesting.
We talked about this a few weeks ago too, when you were talking about, planning your turn.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you had said, like you had seen a player who would just order their hand in a way that they knew, like, I have to play these cards in this order. And they would order at the beginning of their turn so they understood and they would never miss anything. And then I told a story about how one time I did that thing. I came up with my whole plan for my turn, executed the plan perfectly, except I forgot to raise the tide.
Yeah.
And so, like, because I'm thinking like further ahead, where I'm like, okay, like I have a great plan. I understand how this is going to work. I understand what this is going to do for my long-term win condition, and then I just forgot what was right in front of me. So
Mm.
it's very relevant, I'd say.
So for a game like Magic, right? There's a lot of interactivity within a single turn, right? Like I make an attack and immediately it's on you to decide how blocks are happening, or I'm going to try to cast a spell and immediately you have an opportunity to respond to that spell, and or that spell being cast. And KeyForge on the flip side, you make a lot of actions before your opponent has any chances to make a response. And I think a result of that is a KeyForge turn ends up feeling a lot more like a puzzle than a turn on, say, Magic. Not saying that it is or isn't, just that that's kind of the feel, right? You look at a board state, you look at your hand, you're like, all right, I'm going to solve this turn from my most optimal turn that fits into my strategic plan, etc. And in that light, I almost feel like a higher level of board complexity is more acceptable, right? Even
So
more desirable.
you're saying that board complexity is more acceptable in KeyForge than it is in Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think it affects, or how do you think it affects the skill level and the skill ceiling in each of those two games and examples?
Man, that's a tough one. It's hard to say. It's hard to say, only because the nature of the turns are so different. The nature of the execution of the turns are so different. I think you have to look forward through a lot more actions in a typical KeyForge turn. Though on, say a Magic turn, you're playing a lot of what if scenarios out constantly on micro interactions. And it just ends up being a very different kind of skill set, even though if you zoom out, there's a lot of similarities in the game. How it feels to me, at least, the turns playing out feels very different. So I don't know. I'm not sure how I'd say that. I mean, would you say there's a similar thing with like Star Wars CCG, or I'm not really familiar enough to say.
Yeah, Star Wars CCG has back and forth constantly, where every time you do something, your opponent can respond to it,
Yeah.
and you have much larger hands in that game, and they are closed lists, so a player could have anywhere from one to like maybe even 20 cards in their hand,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know what cards they're playing. There's over 3,000 or 3,500 cards in the card pool, and so it's a lot to understand like what you could possibly be facing. And I think in that game, a lot of what new players face is that like the challenge is that they don't even understand what cards are out there. Like, what are the possibilities in this game?
Sure.
And I think in a game like KeyForge, being a lot younger, the possibilities are much more limited in a game like this. But in the Magic comparison, one thing that I thought was really interesting from the original Lenticular design article was a card that I was familiar with from when I played Magic over 20 years ago, Prodigal Sorcerer, or the
Okay.
example they gave, Prodigal Pyromancer. Very simple card. It's a 1/1 creature, costs 3, and it just has a tap, Prodigal Sorcerer, Prodigal Pyromancer, deals 1 damage to any target. I'm like, this is extremely simple.
The
Like,
grunt
you look at
token of the
this and
Magic
it's like,
world. Yeah.
yeah, it's like this is
Not
very
grunt.
very
Sorry.
easy. You just
Yeah.
uh
Rebel.
yeah, exactly. The
Rebel.
rebel.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this isn't that hard of a card. Like, what's the problem here? I didn't understand it. But in Magic, what it comes down to is every action your opponent can have a reaction for it. And so if I choose to attack with a creature and the opponent is thinking about blocking, they see the Prodigal Pyromancer in play, and have to redo the math in their head. Like, okay, like is my creature going to die if I block with it because the Prodigal Pyromancer is in there? And every action they take, they have to consider the Pyromancer until the Pyromancer is tapped.
Right.
And it added this like layers upon layers of like, what is the right decision for me to make as a player, that added so much complexity to the game. And they actually, I think it sounds like they stopped printing that card. Um, Even though the comprehension complexity on it is so low, the tracking complexity and the board complexity on it was extremely high.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It plays into, how the turns play out, where the windows for response are, and how some of those things compound across all those decision points. And I mean, obviously the rebel token is fine, I believe, in KeyForge. I don't think that it's, a bad card or overly complex card. Um, you have the same sorts of calculations, but you're taking many more actions before your opponent has a chance to take advantage of the rebel token, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Interesting.
think the KeyForge side, it being that your opponent cannot respond to you during your turn, it just really leans more into the visualization skill and like how well you can envision the board on this turn and where you want to end up, and also like how that's going to impact the game in the longer term.
Could note from the chat too, saying that complicated boards in KeyForge provide very interesting opportunity costs, and there are no interruptions or instant speed things in KeyForge. Yeah, I think so. I think that's absolutely right. I think having a higher ceiling for board complexity in KeyForge and having just gives you more texture to the complexity landscape, if you will. Uh, and given that you have a lot more that you can do within a single turn or within a single window before your opponent gets a chance to respond, I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, though,
Yeah.
still, I'll never see Cloaking Dongle.
No, no one will. The other one that gets me every time is Post Pixies.
Post Pixies, 90% of the time, actually 100% of the time, gets me 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, Post Pixies is a tracking complexity problem. I think I would probably consider, I think it's Gargantodon, a little bit more on the side of comprehension um,
Mm,
than board, because Garganodon, it kind of like changes what it means to steal or capture. Um, it says like, let me just read it because I've mixed this one up a couple times as well.
I think, yeah,
Um,
Garganodon's mostly there are very, very, very funky edge cases in Gargantodon, especially when your opponent would steal on your turn. It gets very, very convoluted.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I can't find the card. It's not searching for me at the moment. But here we go. Okay, so
Gargantodon.
each amber that would be stolen is captured by a creature controlled by the active player instead. So, like you said, if there's stealing occurring on the other turn, it just kind of like I even have to think about this and try to understand what it's trying to say here. Um, so it's only anti-steal. It's not anti-capture. Um, and if I steal on my turn, rather than stealing, I capture it onto one of my creatures.
Yes,
And if you're stealing on my turn, I capture from myself. Is that correct?
I believe that's right.
Yeah. That's pretty wild to me.
Hmm.
So very different functions depending on whose turn it is.
Yeah, this comes up often with Science Officer Kincan, right, with
Mm.
Gargantodon out, and people getting very confused about like, wait, why am I capturing on my own creature now, sort of a thing. Yeah, it's kind of funky.
And those are both in the same set as well.
They
They're both
are.
in Worlds Collide.
They are.
I don't want to jump ahead, but we're going to come back and talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about the last type of complexity that we brought up at the beginning, which is strategic complexity. Do you want to take that one?
So this is sort of going full tilt on the lenticularity scale, on the lenticularness of the metaphor. So this is the complexity, the sort of complexity or depth to the cards, as it were, that you don't really want to burden your new players with per se, but your experienced players will look at a card and say, "Oh gosh, there's an awful lot for me to think about here." Whereas as a newer player, or a player who's not worried about the strategic side of the game, you might just say, "Oh, cool, it does a thing," and like that's all you really need to worry about. So these are often cards that are either super open ended or seem super benign, but have a lot of depth related to what they can help you achieve over the long term in the game. Some of the cards that we identified were things like Master Plan, an Orb of Wonder, Ulfbert Device. We can go into some of these, but I think one of my favorites too is oh gosh, help me out here. I'm losing the card name. Not Near Future Lens.
Is it an anomaly?
No, it's the common from Star Alliance that lets you look at the top card and then put it at the bottom.
Future Booster.
Future Booster. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you look at Future Booster and you're like, okay, cool. I'll maybe fix my draw. But the more you sit with it, the more you play with it, there's actually a lot of depth to the card and a lot of complexity into its correct usage, right? Like even, we were talking about before the show, even should I Future Boost at the start of my turn before I start making tokens, or should I Future Boost at the end of my turn after I've made tokens and try and fix my first draw? My first draw is like a really big question that can have a lot of impact on the outcome of the game, but it's not something that you're necessarily super worried about the first time you sit down with Future Booster as a new player. And I think that makes it a great card from this perspective. It provides a lot of depth that the experienced player can dig into, and the strategic complexity reveals itself as you level up in the game. But in terms of the other complexities, it's super easy to understand what it does. It doesn't really make the board more complex to understand. And using it, yeah, I mean, there's really not a wrong way to get some value out of it, but to use it to its max potential is a very deep question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. Orb of Wonder is one of the ones that I thought of because anyone can see value in Orb of Wonder. You're like, I can get any card I want whenever I want it. That's like, sounds great. But if you pop it too early or at the wrong time, you might miss your window of getting a card you really need after a shuffle or something like that. A player could look at that and be like, yeah, I have immediate value from getting this, and that sounds great, but it still might not be the right one to do. And you mentioned, you called that depth, which I think is why we both like this type of complexity as a great thing for the game, because you're creating these situations where your decisions turn after turn are going to like compound, and they're going to create more decision points for you, and they're going to make it much more skill based when you have these decisions that are creating more decisions for you going forward. Um, I don't think I came up with fewer examples for this category in KeyForge, but I don't think that's for any specific reason. I think there's tons of these types of cards, but we just kind of named like the low hanging fruit. I think it's pretty easy to call out and to remember like which ones we think are the most complex from a comprehension standpoint, or which ones are most complex from a board or a tracking standpoint. But this one, I feel like there is a lot of cards in this game that offer the strategic complexity that are pretty simple on their surface. Another example you gave me was standardized testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like for this bucket cards that create sort of mini games that you can play with your opponent, and almost sort of small quests within the larger game that'll help you if you're winning those, right? So standardized testing is sort of one which asks you or challenges you to make the most out of this situational board wipe, right? Like, can I orchestrate the battlefield in such a way that I'm getting lots of value from standardized testing while saving most of my creatures? How one-sided can I make this? So there's this sort of mini game of like me protecting my middle of the pack creatures while leaving some of your highs and lows sticking around, and you'll see experienced players discarding their Gloriana's Attendants or what have you, or fighting or placing a Picaroon to protect an Ultra Gravitron or something like that. Whereas those sorts of things aren't necessarily on newer players' radar. And so you can have these mini games that crop up around cards that are not even that folks don't even need to worry about, and that can still offer a lot for experienced players to dig into, sink their teeth into. Yeah. Picaroon to correct. Oh, sorry. Commenting on the chat. I'm going to take a small side detour here, but I love Picaroon as an example of this sort of a card in T-Zager, right? I use Picaroon an awful lot. I'm going to pull up the deck here too. Sorry for nerding out on a specific deck here, but I get a lot of value out of the Picaroon in odd situations, right? So if my opponent has a standardized testing, I'm almost always putting the Picaroon between the Gravitron and something else, just to make sure Gravitron's not the largest power creature. That gets turned on its head if there's a Savage Clash instead, right? Then I want the Gravitron to be the largest and something, and not give them the opportunity to fight the Picaroon over next to the Gravitron. Similar things come up with Dance of Doom. Say you can orchestrate things, or Quintrino Flux, right? With the creature that has variable power, I suddenly have this like.
He got you.
Okay, chat.
I
was being trolled. Yeah, the chat's calling me out for playing in fear. Yes, I do. You got me. But
I think it's a good point, though. I have one of my favorite decks, Macrobell, Mass Mutation deck with a Picaroon, and it has essentially 2 cards of creature control. That is a standardized testing and a Krazap. And if I want to make sure that I clear their creature that's like a 6 power, I want to make sure that I do not put my Picaroon in a place that's going to make him 6 power or more than 6 power, really. Mm-hmm. And it definitely adds that strategic complexity to, like, sure, yeah, it sounds great. I should have a large creature. I want this creature to be like 8 or 9 power if I can. But with the card like standardized in play, you're right. Like, it changes how you might think of other cards, or which cards of theirs you might target, or if you discard the Gloriana's Attendant if you're trying to clear out their 2 power creatures, or things like that.
Yep. Quintrino Flux is another card that can interact very interestingly with Picaroon. In order to maximize the creature destruction on your opponent's side of the board, you may try to place Picaroon in a place where it suddenly has power that overlaps with a decent number of theirs. And so you can now kind of choose their top 2 most prevalent powers if your Picaroon can come with one. Yeah. But anyway, you know what? I have to ask. Do you say Picaroon or Picaroon?
Picaroon.
Okay.
It's like Pikachu, but Picaroon.
I hadn't put that together. Cool. Interesting.
I don't know. That's just how I thought of it. So we talked about how new players like approach this complexity and what they think of it too. And there was a part in the article when Rosewater was talking about, like, how do they solve this problem of like a dwindling player base? How do they bring in and keep new players? And one of the things that they decided to do, and this has kind of been a rule for them, is what they refer to as the New World Order, which I think, to put simply, is using rarity to manage complexity instead of power. Mm-hmm. So you might think with rarity, you're like, okay, well, commons are going to be the weakest, uncommons are a little bit stronger because you get fewer of them, and rare is going to be the strongest. That's kind of how I think historically a lot of people have thought of them, especially at CCGs in the 90s. But I think what they're trying to do now with Magic the Gathering, since the New World Order has been put into place, and he came up with that name, it sounds like, just to have like a way to refer to this concept.
Yeah.
But they are, instead of using power level to determine whether something is common, uncommon, or rare, they use complexity, because they don't want new players to go into a new set and have 5 of the 9 cards in their pack as commons that they don't have any understanding of how they play, or even experienced players, as we talked about. They've had playtesters who are experienced in the game who would read cards and be like, this is a common card, I get this in every pack, I still don't really understand what it does, how it works, how it interacts with this rule. things like that. And so instead, they are keeping the simplest cards at common, and then some of the uncommons and rares can become more and more complex. Um, this was interesting because, in hindsight, when I came up with my list of cards that I felt were the most complex, I went back to check the rarity on them, and they are almost all rares.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thank God, Keyforgery is a rare, or or maybe not. Maybe it should be common because we might understand what it does by this point. But
No,
it
no
would
way.
not be a good card to open up in every single deck that you had in Worlds Collide for Shadows, because it's confusing, and it's good to avoid that. And so I think the New World Order is a type of design principle that I do think was carried over into Keyforge intentionally.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I had to double check too, key forgery, as soon as you started going down this path to make sure that it was a rare. But super cool to see that this is indeed the case. A lot of these are uh, at rare, especially when it's just the single card in isolation. Some combinations you'll see at common that are still pretty tough to think through, or tough to ask newer players to think through. Um, but yeah, I think that's a good thing for KeyForge, and I think that I'd agree. It's something that carried over. Something that carried
Yeah,
over.
there are some uncommons on my list too. Trojan Sauropod was one that I put as comprehension complexity because it's kind of confusing about who's the owner, who gains, who does what. Curiosaurus we mentioned, Mechabui as well.
Mm-hmm.
These are uncommons that I think are fairly complex for various reasons too. Um, but I think I want to like take this one step further and not just think about the rarity, but think about what comes together in
Mm.
a set. And so you mentioned earlier that Kincan and Gargantodon have a very strange interaction with each other.
Yeah.
They're both in Worlds Collide, and one's a common, one's an uncommon, which means you're going to get a reasonable number of decks that get that combination together. If there was nothing in Worlds Collide that would steal during your opponent's turn, Garganodon might be a little bit less complex, but because they put those cards together in the same set, you're more likely to encounter situations, uh, whether that's in sealed play or new players encountering the game, where that complexity rears its head. So I think looking within the set is relevant as well. Not to say that you'll never have interactions. You could obviously, if you're playing an Archon or a bigger event, like you're going to have these interactions, and I think that's part of the charm of KeyForge is encountering interactions you've never seen before. But as far as just understanding, I think um, the rarity combined with what is in set, I think, are very relevant. And I'll give one more example of one that I listed as comprehension complexity, and this is actually partially because these are commons, and this comes in Winds of Exchange. And
Mm-hmm.
how many of us have had this experience where your opponent plays any combination of Befuddle, Illusions of Grandeur, and Watch Your Step at the same time? And you always have to stop and think, okay, like if I choose this house, then this. If I choose this house, then this. And when there's more than one of those happening at a time, you always have to pause and think, like, what are the consequences, just to understand. And Watch Your Step is an uncommon, but Befuddle and Illusion's both common. You see these happen a lot, where you have to stop and figure out, like, how do these two cards interact, and what do I do when they're both played against me at the same time?
Yeah. I have a number of decks that play each of these, and I can hear my opponent's thought process as they're pausing at the start of the turn. Uh, and very often, what happens is they'll pick a house, a thing will happen, and then there'll be another pause, and I'll be like, "Oh, that was not an expected result, was it?" And you want to be like, "Did you want to change that?" But there's no good way to
Hmm.
kind of do it. So I feel this one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
How do you feel about the rarity? Any other thoughts on the rarity to manage the complexity?
I think it's a good tool for it. You know, I'm glad that it's a thing that seems to have kept up from or carried over from Magic to KeyForge. Uh, yeah, yeah, I don't know. I think it's the appropriate tool, and I think that's good that they're kind of going with it. Maybe that's why I don't know. Maybe that's why a lot of my adaptive decks have tons of rares in them,
That could be.
or not, or not. My DT adaptive deck is riddled with rares. There you go. That's interesting. I almost feel like my DT adaptive deck is trying to push on board complexity. My three favorite Worlds Collide adaptive decks that I'm scrolling through my tag on DOK right now are are maybe more trying to present some interesting strategic complexity challenges. Um,
I'd be curious if any Kagi players out there would kind of evaluate the decks that you've played in Kagi and think about like, do these cards have a high level of complexity? And
mm,
what type of complexity is it? And see, I just like to see what emerges from that and how that compares to, a deck choice you might have for Archon.
yeah.
Um, there are ways out there that you could score cards, and I think the Cloggin probably is aware of one of these ways where you can um, give cards different scores to kind of like get up a tally. And I would love to use something like that to kind of understand like how complex is a deck, give a
Mm,
complexity rating to every single card, and see like what are my most complex decks based on my own subjective rating of complexity. I think that could
hmm.
show some pretty interesting results, and using that to sort through your deck, your deck collection might be interesting to find different gems of like things that might have a high ceiling but are difficult to play.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like it'd be cool to explore with. I feel like you could identify a lot of the that middle tier fairly readily. Um, I'd be interested to see how you went about kind of identifying the top tier. But not saying you couldn't do it, but it'd be pretty cool to think through. Yeah. Ooh, a nice comment from the chat too, saying that recursion is a simple
Yes.
concept with high strategic complexity. Totally agree.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, and Foxamal, that is on my list to talk about on this show in the future, just because of how common recursion is going to be in Grim Reminders. It's a really
mm,
fantastic, deep topic that I'm really looking forward to digging into in the future. So I'm very glad you pointed that out. It's a very good observation.
yeah, and don't want to lose this comment from the chat either. It was stated that I play in Fear, which I own. I do play in Fear, but also the question was posed. You know how do sort of emotions play into sort of the design, lenticular design principles? Um, I had a couple thoughts on that. Do you have any? Or I could kind
No,
of.
go ahead.
I I guess we had asked ourselves before, like, hey, these are some great and interesting things to observe about game design, about KeyForge specifically. Um, what do I, as a player, take from it? You know, and one of the big things was, well, a fuller, richer appreciation for the game is kind of one, and I think emotion plays into that a good bit, right? I think that realizing that you're peeling back layers of strategic complexity is a very rewarding process. The folks will talk a lot about mastery loops within games, and uh, I think this kind of falls into that camp, right? When you realize that you're wrestling with a new layer of problem that you haven't wrestled with before with the game, like that can feel very rewarding or frustrating. I don't know, or frustrating. Um, but on the top end, I think there's a lot of satisfaction, a lot of like enjoyment to be had there. And certainly, if the bottom ones, the bottom two, or kind of the first two layers are, if you're overwhelmed by them, that's a very frustrating experience. A very frustrating experience. And hopefully, you've got a friendly person to guide you through the game, who's not going to throw Guadalupe at you on your first go.
I did I did play a different crazy DT deck at a local, just in a casual game. But
Mm.
experienced player, they know what they're doing. It's not like they'd never seen the game before. But I was playing a deck with Tide Warp, Mechabooey. Sorry, wait, no Mechabooey. Tide Warp, two static collection arrays, Operative Espeon, and Universal Translator. And so every time at the start of my turn, if I raise the tide with those cards out, I would be able to use at least two different creatures
Hmm.
before my Forge a Key step.
Yeah.
And so I could basically if the tide was high for my opponent, they end their turn. I get the tide. I reap with two creatures, and then I forge for four. And so like adding those different things there, like yeah, that's another one of my favorite DT decks. It just does like so many crazy things at timing windows when you wouldn't expect it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of a jarring experience when you're not used to that.
Totally interesting. Man, I apologize to the folks who are just listening to the show, but I keep coming back to this upside down Witch of the Wilds. I had never
What
looked at
is that? How did you get that?
I never looked at it before.
I
It
don't
is like
have
blowing
that
my
in my
mind.
okay. No, seriously though, like I go to that page and it's not upside down for me. How did you do that?
No, I just flipped the image upside down.
How did you do that?
Magic stuff, magic stuff.
Oh man.
Yeah, but it was mentioned in the chat when we were talking about I swear I made up this word lenticularity, that Witch of the Wilds was a prime example, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess. But then they were like, no, in the art, have you ever seen it from the opponent's perspective? Like, man, looking at it upside down, my mind is blown. My mind is blown.
Hmm.
So wherever you are, go get a Witch of the Wilds and look at it upside down. It's cool. I don't know, it just hits me right there. Yeah.
I was trying to find a good time to ask you like how the heck did you get that to show upside down? Because I had never thought about what that image looks like for the opponent either.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Pretty cool. Well, very good. I don't know, quick draw. Was there anything else you wanted to hit on?
Why don't you close before you get to the sponsor? Why don't you close with one of the other, I don't know if it's a quote or a specific thing about Michael Tao, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, Mikhail Tal. Yeah. Actually, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. The magician of Riga, as he's known. One of my favorite chess players of all time. And this particular quote of his struck out to me, and I was thinking about Guadalupe 1000%, and you in particular as I was reading it. Um, and the quote goes like this. He says, you must take your opponent into a deep, dark forest where 2 plus 2 equals 5, and the path leading out is only wide enough for one. That's the quote. And for folks who don't know, Tal was a world chess champion and of yore. And if you analyzed his games today, I don't think you would find, top accuracy games, compared to what you'd see from folks who are studying with engines now. But he was a creative genius who specialized in creating these beautifully complex board states and just burying his opponents in complexity, and and creating these masterpieces of games, and that makes me 100% think of Guadalupe, and with you using complexity sort of as a tool in your arsenal to craft these intricate board states where 2 plus 2 equals 5, and
Yeah.
who knows how much amber you need to forge with Mecha Booey and Static Collection
True.
Array. Yeah.
I love that quote, and I love his approach to chess too, because it's just so like wild and unexpected. And I mean, that's the type of player that I would like to be, is like being able to just do something to make your opponents so confused about what's going on, but at the same time, like in total fear of like what's happening to them because they don't
Mhm.
quite understand it. And they actually have to think like maybe 2 plus 2 is 5 here in this situation.
Indeed, indeed. Oh,
So that was very cool.
the
I like
chat's
that one.
chat's enjoying it as well. Oh yeah, a question. Anybody know? Maybe Clog and Arquetz are around, of any other cards? Dataforge. I don't know, Zach, if you know any other cards that have art that is upside down or are meant to be seen from your opponent's perspective. I don't know. And while you're chewing on that, I almost wish, this is sort of as a final aside, that there was um, some visual treatment given to cards that either impacted like neighboring cards or were elusive, right? Like you could imagine some sort of frame treatment or something that's like, yeah, this is elusive, or like, hey, you give this another read before you attack, sort of a visual cue. I don't know. I don't know if there's
Or
a
like a Arms Master Bellina with like arrows pointing to either side and saying
yeah, yeah,
hazardous 3 or something like that.
something like that. Like, you think that's too much of like a trying to aid the player, or you think that would be kind of reasonable.
I mean, I go back to the cloaking dongle, and you don't. There's not really a good answer for cloaking dongle, for like, because that just goes on a creature. I don't know.
The cloaking
Um,
dongle, I'd say, gets the same arrows that Molino gets if we're doing arrows.
yeah, I
You
guess
know.
so. Yeah,
Um,
but what about like, I don't know. In the new set, there is the Witch Queen from Grim
hmm
Reminders. Spoiler alert: the Witch Queen says each of your other witches gains elusive.
Yeah.
That's some tracking. It actually has a lot more text than that, so there is a lot of complexity going on with that card. But how do you do something like that where it's not just as easy as arrows pointing to either side?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, the chat saying, hey, yeah, this could be a TCO thing. Yeah, I think that'd be really cool, and totally agree that would make us lazy. I'd be hesitant for one that TCO could roll out that wasn't mirrored by the cards IRL. Um, it's
Didn't
tough.
TCO used to have stuff like that? That sounds familiar.
Hmm.
I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking of something different, like the armor. Um,
The armor thing does happen. Like it actually ticks up and down.
hmm
Um,
Yeah, yeah. Um, oh, the cloaking dongle point again reminds me that you had kind of compared a couple cards that I think you felt were very easy to understand and then more difficult. Cloaking dongle being the difficult one. Technobabble, having like, I think you gave that as an example of something that's very clear,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, the cloaking dongle technobabble comparison is sort of in my mind a good example of very similar effects, but one is done in a way that's very light on its addition to board complexity, whereas one is very heavy, right? Like cloaking dongle is practically invisible. I mean, we don't have an elusive token to assign to creatures. I'm glad, but uh, but I think these cards both do the like, hey, I impact this creature and its neighbors, um, sort of thing, and I think that cloaking dongle does it in a way that's super hard to track. Uh, or not, I mean, super hard. It's harder to track than Technobabble for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah. I'm not seeing it in the Coward's End. I'm not sure if I see it being upside down. It's hard to understand what's going on in the picture in general, though.
Mm. Yeah,
It's a
there's
goblin with a grenade. That's all
Gone
I
with a
can see.
grenade. Interesting one. I don't know. We'll have
Mm,
a I don't know, episode on upside down cards at some point.
yeah.
uh, okay, well, I'm gonna go and hear from our sponsors, I guess. But I meant to actually say this at the top of the show, but I'll do it now because better late than never, right? Um, we are gonna do some giveaways. I think quick draw, yeah, for this month. Maybe we'll go through January. I don't know. We're announcing it kind of late.
Holiday season might be a good time to do it.
Holiday season. There you go.
But you're right, it is pretty late. By the time this hits your podcatcher, it's going to be just a few days before Christmas.
Yeah, I think we need to probably record the Christmas special next week.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But there are two email addresses I have for you. Okay, quick draw. There's topics tonight, okay, at sloppylabwork.com. Send a topic suggestion to that address, or or send a puzzle, a KeyForge puzzle, to puzzles3457 at sloppylabwork.com. Okay. A puzzle sent to the former, or a topic suggestion sent to the latter will get you an entry into a drawing for, I don't know, Vaultmaster deck or WoW deck or something.
This is very appropriate for a week on complexity.
Yes.
I think you
Yes.
need to write down those instructions.
I'll put them in
And
the show notes.
now I got to understand I have no idea what the email addresses are.
Okay.
I'm
You got
puzzles3457 at sloppylabwork.com.
puzzles3457 at sloppylabwork.com,
And
or
then,
topics tonight at
and when you
sloppylabwork.com.
say tonight, you must be the number 2 and then NITE or NIGHT,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
just like our friend Not Tonight.
Not tonight. That's right.
Are those real email addresses?
They are. They are.
You could have just given them JT Russell at sloppylabwork.com.
I'm
We
gonna
send
let
everything there.
I'm gonna let you in on a secret, quick drop. I have a catch-all email address, so you can send it to whatever the heck you want at sloppylabwork.com, and I'll get it.
That's very clever.
Yeah.
So send it over to this was a terrible idea at sloppylabwork.com, and it's still going to go to the right place.
Yes. There you go.
But I will say you are serious about one thing, which is that I'm very happy to give away. I have a few Vault Master decks in my closet, and I guess JT says we're giving one away to someone who randomly sends us a puzzle or a topic.
At least one. At least one.
At least one.
Yeah.
He's just going to give away all my Vault Master decks.
As long as they're yours. Yeah. All right.
There we go.
There we go. Cool. Well, speaking of sponsors and the holiday season, quick draw. This episode of Bottom of the Beaker was sponsored by Krog's Nog. Unlock the season's best with Krog's Nog. This ain't your old Bruno's eggnog. Krog's Nog brings the perfect, rich and creamy blend of an epic poetry weaving of nutmeg, cinnamon, and vanilla. Whether you're forging bonds with loved ones or enjoying a solo adventure this year, Krog's Nog is the ultimate amber of festive indulgence. And for our 21 plus crowd, be sure to check out the bottles that are marked with the extra clumsy label. Okay, so there you go.
Very nice.
Very nice. All right, now quick draw is trolling me in the chat. I like it.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Email it to whatever you want at sloppylabwork.com.
Yeah.
The only one that will not go to your email address,
No.
I believe, is quickdraw3457 at sloppylabwork.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Or are you also spying on my emails?
Nope, I will not get that one. So if you want to slip into QuickDraw's direct emails, you can send it to
Great.
quickdraw3457 at sloppylabwork.com.
And just know that we don't trust JT. He might be reading that email.
I'm probably reading that email.
Yeah.
Probably. Very good. Well, folks, this is actually pretty cool. We have a new night that we're recording Bottom of the Beaker on. We are now recording Wednesdays, not Tuesdays, sometime between 9 and 9:30 Eastern time is when we start up. So if you want to catch us live, that's when we're going to be happening. You can find recordings of our past shows and archives of other streams over at youtube.com. Search for @sloppylabwork over there. And for the very best content, 57 times distilled and scraped from the bottom of the beaker. Search for that very phrase in your podcatcher of choice, and we'll be there right next to the Cloaking Dongled podcast. I think. Attack twice.
Sitting
just to
right
be safe.
between Cloaking Dongle and Arms Master Melina.
Yes. Find all that and more at sloppylabwork.com. And quick draw, any final words for the folks getting off the last audio stop?
Thanks for listening today, and stay sloppy.
Stay sloppy. Excellent. Cool. Yeah. Get ready for all the email spam you're going to get, quick draw. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I had to give you my real email address too, didn't I? So
you did. I'm going to set up that filter real fast.
Yeah, I'm going to have to.
Nice.
Well, I think if the Cloggin is still around, was it a serious offer for him to send us some AOA sealed decks to play tonight?
I mean, we may get some freshies to pop to play sealed with. We'll see.
Digitally pop.
Digitally pop. Yeah. Let's see. Maybe.
And maybe the Cloggin wants to join for a hand and brain. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. That could be fun. That could be fun. Well, we'll give them a minute to decide, or rustle up a fresh 45 SAS rated deck from the bottom of his shoebox.
And tell us that it's new.
Yeah. Otherwise, we could maybe pull. What do you think? A random access archive game?
Or just a DT game.
DT game.
Or we could do random access archive for DT.
Random access archive for DT. I like that. Let's do it. I like that.
All right.
Okay.
So we're going to go with DT only. Do we have a SAS range we want to look at here?
No. let's go to the chat. Chat got a SAS range, a min and a max for us. A min and a max for us. Oh, thank you for the offer, Data Force stream. And man, we should probably do this. Make this a thing. I don't know if folks want to join for the hand and bring at the end. That could be fun when we don't have a guest. All right, 61 to 72. Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right.
61 to 72.
You want to play open deck lists?
Let's do. Let's do open deck list. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason.
I can't believe it. It's perfect. I swear to God, this is random, and it is literally the deck that I wanted to play. This is the deck I would have chosen. I'm going to take a screenshot of this because it's just that unbelievable.
All right, I need to make the random access archives Twitch Twitch bot because this is super suspect. I don't know.
I'm gonna send you a screenshot right now. This is truly the deck that I wanted to play. Miraculous. I have to thank DataForge Stream for that range. That range was the perfect set of random number generator for me to get the deck that I wanted.
So you're playing Sketchy Knifedom. Okay.
Yes.
Sketchy Knifedom.
It's a great name. This is the deck that has the Tide Warp, Operative Espeon, and double static collection array that I just talked about.
Oh, cool. Right on.
Super cool that like that. Oh, I'm giddy right now. That's perfect.
Well, right on.
I'm gonna start up a game while you figure out how to rig the system to get the deck that you want as well.
So I did my poll live just now on stream, whereas your screenshot from 3 days ago after rerunning it 6 times,
I didn't know I mean,
across
how did I know
every
that
possible
DataForge
SAS range?
Stream?
Yeah.
How did I know the DataForge Stream was going to say 61 to 72?
Planted. I've been set up. I pulled actually a deck that I've played a couple times on stream already. So I'll give you the option quick draw. You all right if I play this one still? I mean,
yeah, for sure. I haven't seen it in a while. I think that'll be cool.
Okay, cool. We'll keep the integrity of the archives. Yeah, we should make that a Twitch bot. All right, Wolf the Electric. Actually, fun fact: this deck was originally Cloggin's deck, and now it is my deck.
This deck of mine was originally McBuffin's. So.
Okay.
All right, so we've got double Ulfbert device. I love it already. Hydra Cataloger, Isotropic Core, some good complexity right there. Book of LeQ. So now, like, it's interesting. I'm looking at this as like, what are the most complex cards here, instead of what are the cards that I need to be paying attention to. And of course, you guys already knew going into this, I think, that there's no way that I could be excited about a deck if it didn't have Whirlpool in it. So this is a double Whirlpool deck. I'm pretty stoked.
Deck.
This is my kind of complexity. And let's just make sure you don't have any stupid R. And looks like we're in the clear. So let's try to let the madness ensue.
All right, this is a mulligan for me. Hand without a Eureka and a double Eureka deck has to be a mulligan. So here we go.
All right, so I am going first, and we're just going to drop PI7.
Oh, man. A witch to kick us off. All right, well, I'm doing the Eureka thing.
Old EGAD. All right, now, do I reap? Let's see what else you got here. So for creature control, you've got the Grand Alliance Council, which would kill me since you got a Logos out. You cannot fight me off, though. Assert Dominance would do it. Persistent Hunting would be good enough. Not a ton of creature control, though. So I am going to take my chances here. And capture on itself.
Ooh, Hawkins and Hawkins, very cool. And a
Not a bad
Triska.
start. Not a
Cool.
bad start.
And yeah, question about the random access archives. It pulls decks from a Decks of KeyForge account. So yeah, these were our own decks. So yeah, we haven't just played every DT deck that's out there. We recognize them as our own.
I might have.
You've played a lot. You've played a lot of them for sure.
I played a lot of CLDT from TCO, like whenever it first came out, especially before it was released in the US.
Speaking from not much board control, you're looking a little thin as well.
Well, I got the board first, so I feel like that's playing in my favor.
Yeah. All right, no on the archives.
Yes on the GAC.
Yes on the GAC. Oh, why did I play the...
It's that complexity.
Gets
No
me every time.
take-backs.
No take-backs. Got too excited to GAC you.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Well, cannot let that Tabor stay on the board. What are we looking at for Tide Razors over there? Is this your infamous 0 Tide Razors deck?
I don't think it's 0. It might be 0.
Ooh, it might be 0.
It has few Tide Razors.
I don't have many over here either, I don't think. So, should be a fun one. Tide Warp once it comes out, but
I'm not seeing one looking through.
yeah, I'm not seeing one either. Very interesting. So that means I am going to do this. First of all, everyone's favorite card, the Whirlpool.
Nice.
What's Abandoned Ship?
Cool.
And Hookmaster.
And Seabringer.
Seabringer.
Interesting. Gives me the Hookmaster. Cool. Oh. Gross. Already with the decisions.
That complexity gets you, man.
Yeah, the Whirlpool adds a lot. You're at check at 5. That's annoying. Then we just go Logos here. I will take the archives, play the Hydrocat, play the Isotropic Core, Info Exchange to steal 1, and I'm going to ship you an old EGAD across the Whirlpool.
I will take the old EGAD, and you're at check at 6.
I am at check at 6.
All right. Let's go back into Unfathomable while I can. Sleep with the Fishes. Netcaster. Colia. And a Reap.
Okay, that's a key. Fish Best House. Don't necessarily disagree with the username. Interesting. I think I'm very tempted to go Unfathomable here.
Those are the best games. Those are the best games.
Yeah, I'm going to go Unfathomable. I'm going to raise the tide to get an archive. Cool. I'm going to fight into this Netcaster. And reap. Okay.
Excellent. Well then, I am going to go Star. And Exploratory Craft's one of my favorite cards to go with Whirlpool.
Great with Whirlpool,
Hopefully
sure.
can get some good value out of that. The aforementioned Espeon, which
Nice.
I don't think I want to give to you, because I know you have a Tabor in hand. But I am going to raise the tide.
Mm-hmm.
And let's put this on the Wicolia, and we're going to archive a card. Very cool. And now I get to use a card. And let's just, I think, reap with the Wicolia. So,
Cool.
free tide raise is nice.
Yeah, so you have a Tide Warp coming at some point. Biome Discovery still. Ambervac just got played. Okay. Tidal Wave to give me the tide. But not a ton of Tide Raisers. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Well, I'm going to move some cards in Untamed here. Yeah, I'm going to race to tax you. 9. Archive first. Archive to thing. Cool. I mean, we got to fight. People want fighting right now, I think. Exhaust the unfathomable creatures. And make a big old egad, sure.
Let's see here. So, you got a 7-power egad.
Hey, Barcidius, welcome. Welcome, welcome.
Okay.
Big ol' egad. Biggest egad.
Okay. I think I like this. I'm going to be giving you this Tink.
I'll
Good
take
luck
a Tink.
with that.
Tink's
Let's
great.
put a translator here. Dive pod on the Wicolia.
Just stacking up the upgrades over there.
So I'm going to reap here, and I'm going to fight with the Seabringer, which will bring me back the tide.
Cool.
And I cannot use anything with the Espeon, unfortunately. But it gets me an archive. Raise the tide for free. Hopefully winning this game of chains and get no value out of the exploratory craft yet.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Ooh, tricky one. 4-1. So you've got Translator, Ambervac, Dive Pod. Ugh. Okay. I'm gonna go Star here again. Yes on the archives. Gonna gack away the
That's no fun.
Espion.
Weren't we having fun with Espion?
We're not having fun with the Espion. I'm gonna take the tide again.
Oh, bring it on.
Yeah. Who needs cards? Cards. People don't need cards. They just need to fight. And reap with Tink and send the Tink back.
Okay, so I will forge for 7.
Forge for 7.
I could take you off check. Don't know if it's worth it.
Always be card, not drawing. You know, the chat's saying always be card, not drawing. I'm just like next leveling the always be card discarding. You know,
By just not drawing any cards.
By just not drawing any cards.
Clever. I don't really want to pass you the Wicolia yet.
I'll take a Wicolia. Yeah, it's tricky right now, like needing to play a creature to not give you this CXO. Yeah.
It's creating some interesting situations here.
That it is.
I might make it even harder on you.
Sounds like another Whirlpool. Let's go.
Yeah. Is that the way to go, though?
Can you not play another Whirlpool?
I could not play it right now, but it's going to come out, right? It has to come out.
It's one exception to always be card discarding.
Yeah, okay. And we are also going to raise the tide. We're going to exhaust that Tabor before you get any better ideas. Going to reap here.
Okay.
I will play the Seabringer, capture on Tink, and I will play another Whirlpool and capture on Tink.
Super cool.
And Which whirlpool do I want to trigger first? That's a good question, TCL.
That one.
That one indeed.
So, the tide is low. My Seabringer, my Wacolia has elusive. Okay.
How's this tracking complexity for you?
Yeah, kind of funky.
It's really funky.
Back pod. There's some cool stuff to do here. I like it. We're going untamed, taking the archives.
Big hand there.
Big hand. Big hand to 5. Do I take more chains? I don't know.
What's the difference at this point? Just take him.
Just go for it. Yeah. Glares from the chat. I love it. All right. Youngest bear comes down. As does Deepwater Gruen. I'm going to gift you an amber.
Oh my.
Nice guy. Now, big question. Do I want to send back the Tink or just steal the... No, I can't steal, can I? Yes, I could steal. Give you a key for 5 so I can steal one? And kill your Cocoa? Not quite. The Tink's just going to come right back. So I think we cash in on it. Oh, non-Star Alliance. That's not going to do the trick. Sad Tink. Sad Tink. I'm
trying to figure out what you're talking about, what you're going to do.
I'm going to assert dominance, the CXO.
Ah, I see. Well, wait, there's no universal translator.
No. I was thinking I could now swap the Tink, but I will not be able to. Because I'm going to get to use a non-Star Alliance one. Yeah. So I think I just get to reap with Volcolia, which is okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, just for fun, we'll use the ritual balance.
So much fun.
That one first. Okay, there you go.
No value is fun. Okay. All right. Think. Gonna have to go Logos here.
Logos is good.
Let's play the Anomaly Exploiter.
Seaborg. Cool.
Yep.
Cool.
kind of a bummer to not get back to check.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, that's a key. I'll take it. I mean, this looks like a Starline's turn.
I have a feeling they might all be from now out for you.
They could be. Well, probably not the next one.
That book here is looming. What is the book going to do this turn?
I think the book probably holds still.
Can't afford to not shed chains.
That's the ultimate kick with the book. You don't get to shed chains either. Yeah. I'll give you back the Wacolia though. That feels kind of bad. Always be shedding chains. Always be chain discarding.
Always be chain diminishing.
I may take the chains. I may take the chains. All right, yeah, we're going Star Alliance. Ulfbert device comes down.
That's a good one.
It's a cool one. Reap. 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess I can get to check. You stop me with Wacolia or information exchange. Oh, I think I don't worry about that a ton. The check this turn. I am going with the always be taking chains over always be going to check mantra this time around. Yeah, it really does. So we reap here. We also... Oh, interesting. No. We also reap here. We action the Tink to swap it with the Tabor. Here. And you're going to get back with Colio with the Ambervac. I'm going to protect my Amber and raise the tide here. Okay, not use the book. Yes. Okay.
Interesting use of the Tink there to give the Ember back as opposed to getting any value.
Yeah. Still giving Tink and not Wacolia. Oh, I could have swapped Wacolia, used it, and used another creature with Tabor. Would I have given the Tabor?
You would have given... Yeah, you would have given the Tabor then.
Given a Tink and not Tabor. Maybe that would have been better, Zoc. I was trying to not give the Tabor over, but maybe that was... That's the downside. Yeah. Maybe Tabor was better to hand over than Wacolia, to be honest. That's very possible. Good question. I had 3 Star Alliance cards left in deck. 3 Star Alliance cards left in deck.
That device came down at a very good time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, cannot go logos here. So,
Yeah.
I feel like you're pretty likely to go logos. You haven't gone logos in a very long time. You haven't drawn many cards lately either.
There's that. Yeah, being at check would have been a good call. Mm-hmm. So I was just to kind of fill the air here, give you some time to think. I was hoping to get to 8 on my next turn, thinking that Wacolia and Info Exchange are the big tools he has left, as long as I keep my Amber off the Amber back. So I think if I get to 8, I'm feeling pretty good, unless I've missed some of the capture pips that have come through. And he can't go Info Exchange this turn, and then hit me with Wacolia next turn. The big thing that he could do is if I give him CXO, he could... no, I guess not. I could not do that. But we'll see. He's going to get a bunch of draws with Exploratory
Yeah,
Craft.
I'm going to take advantage of the draws. It's just going to be a matter of which ones I want to draw,
Mm-hmm.
which ones I may want to use with Tink.
Yeah. And so this is cool. You will not get use of the Tabor on the next turn.
Unless I have another way of using it.
Unless you get the play the Espeon now, yeah.
Well, the Espeon's gone.
Oh, just one?
Yeah, just one.
Just one Espeon. Okay. So we've seen both Hawkins. There's another collection array. There's the Biome Discovery to raise the tide. We saw the Translator, I think. Yes. Okay. I mean, that's pretty cool. Swap with the bear. Get some extra uses, but it's going to mitigate your draw potential. Yeah.
I was going to try to get a free raise, but I don't know if I need the free raise.
ABC is before ABCD. You make an interesting point there, Zoc, with the logic and all. I like it.
I'll go with the free raise. Draw 3.
Okay.
Looks like maybe I didn't need the free raise.
Sounds like we drew our Biome Discovery.
Should have thought about that. Do I want to discard something? I don't think I do. Which is actually good for me. So I don't have to pass you Talmage.
Okay. Biome raises the tide. Reaps with Seaborg.
I think I'm pretty happy with how that played out.
Now we'll see if I'm missed anything. Ooh, tidal wave. I wonder what... Is that a capture pip on that tidal wave?
I don't know. We'll never know.
I mean, I could check TOK. It's okay. I don't think it changes my play. I think I have one play here anyway. Unfathomable, hilarious. Ooh, is there an eddy in there? There is an eddy in there. Nice. Yeah. I missed that eddy. Well, we're going Logos. No on the archives. Eureka. So eddy alone is enough. Just cool. I think we're just trying to overwhelm your amber control here. And I'm going to take the tide. Yeah. 11 chains. Let's go. Okay.
Okay, so... I think this plays in my favor.
Doesn't sound like a man who's out of amber control options. But you get to tidal wave me, I guess. No, you don't. You have to raise first. I'm
going to take the archives.
Kakoa can raise. Cool. Takes the
Can
archives.
indeed. So let's think through this. So I'm going to visualize like you had taught me to 2 weeks ago. See if I do this right. I know I'm going to reap with the Bacolia because that's going to be needed to take you off check. And that is not dependent on the tide, so I should just do that first. Do I want to take chains to take the tide? I think so. I don't think I'm at one chain already, so it doesn't matter if I fight or not for free, because I'm not drawing anyway. That'll get me an archive, a single archive from the Hydro Cat. Or I could actually kill it. No. Okay. Gonna play that. Gonna reap. Gonna reap. Gonna raise. Okay. Play the Netcaster. Gonna raise. Archive a card.
Cool.
Gonna reap. And reap. And we're gonna tidal wave.
Cool. Very cool.
And we're gonna capture on I think I'm gonna capture on Steelheart. And now the question, you just went Logos, you're probably going to go back to Untamed, so I think I'm just going to wipe your board. And I do not need to raise again. Well, I should, though. I don't know if it matters. I'll forge for 8. I'll have 4 left over. You're probably going to go to Untamed, so I'll have 3 left over. Man, you got 5 in archives. That's a lot. I just gave you an extra one too.
Mm-hmm. Who needs to draw cards? Who needs to draw them?
You can just keep archiving them.
Can do it.
You got a Mookling over there? No, no Mookling. And you just went Logos, so you can't actually go Logos again. Could have another GAC. Could have a Valmart. The Valmart would be mega sad, but you probably have the Valmart by now. And so I think for that reason, this game could go on. And I'm going to raise. Make you manually raise if you want the Valmart.
Okay. Interesting. So you have an empty deck. I was fortunate. Eddie can come down and archive another. But you can't put more in with Hydrocat. Next turn. Right. And we just went Unfathomable. Okay. So in... Starlines, you get a Wacolia Reap plus... I think that's it with the tidal wave being played. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11. Seabringer, Call of the Void's been played. Whirlpool, okay. Bilge Warden, we haven't seen yet. Can do some tide turning shenanigans, but with an empty deck, you're not going to boost your Eddie that much. I think you can only get one more card in archives. What am I missing? Theory or Conjecture can play the top or archive, but there's nothing to archive. Brain Eater. Can we make a fight in Logos with Brain Eater to draw? Don't think so. Okay. All right, sweet. I think we just go Star Alliance. Yes on the archives. Off-Burt device comes down. Yes to the tide. More and more tide.
This is a very high complexity game, is it not?
It is a very high complexity game. Yeah. Play the Valmart on the left. Light of the Archons goes on it. Play the Unity or Discord and return Valmart and upgrades. Now, do I replay the Valmart and let you get it if you survive? I don't think you survive. And I can go Star Alliance next turn if I really want to. All right, I may regret this. We're putting it back out. And the book is super safe. Let's see if I can flip an Untamed card. That would be awesome. I mean, a Logos card. We flipped Old Patty. Old Patty.
It's not bad. Not a bad flip.
We do get to steal. And Way of the Pixie. Do we want Way of the Pixie? I think we just discard it. Okay. All right.
Keys are 14.
14. Yeah.
Let's see. Your keys are going to be 6.
So Quick Draw still got Honor Skis, Tide Warp, Bilge Warden, Eddie, and
I think having the Unity or Discord is what did it for you.
You're not far from You could probably make an Honor Skis key this turn.
If not for the Valmart making it +6.
Yeah. Even with the collection array. Going the other way.
If you played the Valmart once, I think I would have forged there for 11, and then I could have forged again despite the. I think I could have forged again despite the Valmart, but being that you played him twice, I think was a little bit too much for me to be able to handle. Now, I think I do have one potential out.
Ooh.
But I have to get lucky. I don't think I have a way of drawing outside of Star Alliance. So, gonna have to go with that.
Yeah, that's cool. So you get to play the Eddie and draw. I like that.
Now, do I take the Eddie, though? I don't know if I think I have to. Yeah, unfortunately, the Eddie is in the archive.
Gotcha.
Which definitely threw me off. I needed to draw him earlier.
That's interesting. I'll be curious to see you pull off the stop then.
Yeah, I don't think I can, but just getting it to draw a couple cards might give me a chance at a universal translator. Yeah, I'll take the archive. Okay, I drew a card that will not help me.
It is up to 3 too. Just a heads up.
Yeah, I don't know. I was hoping it was a bug. Maybe I could draw 3.
Right on.
I don't know. I'm not using them anyway. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it. Too bad too, because I have a really sweet hand. All my logos was at the end of the deck, which was great for the Honors Kiesis. I did have a turn when I could have discarded the Bilge Warden, and I should have. Would have allowed me to flip my deck sooner and survive. But I wanted to hold on to the tide control, and I didn't really need to. And I think even in this case, I would just discard that. We'll reap there. And let's play the top card of the deck, which is a Hawkins. Get me up to 14. Raise the tide. And that's a GG.
Oof, good game.
I thought I had it. I didn't count on the Discord. Because my hand and archives were 9 Logos cards, which included an Honors Keysis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Holy
I could have
moly.
forged for 5 Amber, even with one single Valmart, which I could have gotten 5 from my hand and board um, very easily. So it was the Unity or Discord that did me in. Um,
Yeah, it was a lucky draw.
yeah.
Lucky draw too, in that it was the last of the last two Star Alliance cards in the deck, and made for a completely safe book. Um,
hmm
so that was super fortunate. Uh,
The book didn't actually um, hurt me there because one of the cards I had in Logos was an information exchange, and
mm,
so that gave me an extra steal. So it didn't really make that big of an impact. But the biggest thing was keeping me off the key with the Valmart in the first place,
yeah, yeah. I,
even though
w-
I had 12.
I was I was counting up your logos at the end there, seeing an empty draw pile, and still many logos cards unaccounted for, including the honor skesis. So that was fortunate.
Yeah, and I had the Hydro Cataloger 2 there at the end. Just didn't get a good chance to play it. But like, I think if the Logos cards came earlier, I could have really set up the combo, I think, a bit better. Um, Tide Warp never came to the end. Eddie never came to the end. I did hold the Honors Keysis for a bit, realizing it was probably my win condition. Um, but yeah, if I can get some more archives, and if I could have flipped my deck, I think I had a chance.
Yeah,
Probably came down to the Bilge Warden and not discarding it.
interesting,
Although
interesting.
maybe not, because the turn that I would have flipped my deck, I had too many chains and too big of a hand anyway. So it's hard to tell if I actually would have flipped it.
I can't remember, yeah, exactly how many chains and cards it would have come down to.
Yeah. I went up to 7 that turn when I potentially could have flipped the deck, but I think I still had like 7 cards in hand. So yeah, that was a good one. That was a really good game.
Yeah, it was a good game. I mean, super complex game. Showcased the topic
Complexity.
the topic very well. I mean, it wasn't like a 15 creature wide board. We had relatively small battle lines, but a lot of
hmm
complex interactions. I mean, I don't. Did you feel like it was over the top complex, or like
Um,
still in the realm of
I
like this
mean,
is fun to puzzle through?
it's fun for me, but I can totally understand for a lot of players that would not be fun because it
Mm.
was a lot. But that's the level of complexity I want in a game like this because like I talked about, like discarding the Bilge Warden 2 or 3 turns before that would have been one of those plays that like had even more options open up to me after I
Hmm.
play it. And those are the kind of games that I love about KeyForge is when you have these little things that can have like a ripple effect down the game. And I really feel like you get that more often in Dark Tidings than you do other sets. And that's, I think, in part due to the complexity that we saw with a lot of these cards. The Hydra Cataloger and, having to choose to take the chains or not. Like so many people say like, oh, chains are just like make the game boring, but like I don't think that game was boring for either of us with the chains involved.
Hmm. No, I mean, gave it some pretty interesting bite. I thought the trade offs were kind of fun to puzzle through. Although, uh, I mean, from my side, the chat may disagree with me, but I thought that the taking the chains was pretty justified most of those times. I don't know. Um,
I was upset that you took them a couple times. I wish that you wouldn't have.
mhm.
Um, I was hoping you forgot a couple times. Could have forged for 5. That would have been nice. Um, Definitely holding my breath. Maybe he'll forget to raise the tide before playing the Valmart.
Yeah, yeah,
All kinds of good stuff like that.
yeah. Forget before the Valmart would have happened. I missed one at the beginning. No, I played 2-Star Alliance creatures before gacking. Yeah, that was silly, but did not miss a tide raise, I think, so that was good. And managed to drop pretty well towards the end of the game. Yeah, looking at a hand of Logos with Think Twice now is nice.
Yeah,
But
my whole hand is Honors Keesis, Bilge Warden, Hydra Cataloger, Brain Eater, Tide Warp, Eddy, Info Exchange, Call of the Void.
oof, that's spicy. And now with
Yeah.
the deck flipped, the second Hydra Cataloger is going to supercharge that Eddy too. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially with the Bilge Warden and possibility of getting the Seaborg passed back to me.
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
if I have the tide, you play the other cat, raise, get 2 archives,
hmm
build a ward and raise again after I get the tide, and you +4 my key cost. But see,
Yeah.
I'm almost there, and then you've got Theory or Conjecture for 2 more +6.
Yeah. I only played Theory or Conjecture
Wow.
last turn as like a desperation. Let's see what happens. But yeah,
Right.
I definitely would have held the Theory or Conjecture. This is actually one of the few decks where I would consider playing it for the Wild Wormhole effect, just because of the Honors Keesis.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I have one other Honor deck where I will play Theory or Conjecture for the Tame Whirlpool as a wormhole. Tame Whirlpool.
I
For a
actually
plus
have
bomb.
Anakim has a Theory or Conjecture and a actually, does Anakim have a Theory or Conjecture? I know it has an Honors
It has
Keesis,
an
but
Honor
now I'm like, wait a
Skeesis.
minute.
That's fairly
Yeah,
live.
yeah. Now I'm like, wait a minute. Maybe it doesn't have a Theory or Conjecture. No,
It
it doesn't.
does not. Does
No.
not. It does the moray tricks with Bilge Warden.
Yeah, with the Bilge Warden. Yeah, that requires some manual raising, but it's pretty cool when it goes off. If you get the Rooftop Lab or the Reckless Experimentation on the binary moray and use it 2 times. I think I could use it 3 times in a turn. Um, and then yeah, because you can have the Bill Jordan come into play ready to lower it, and then manually raise, reap to lower it, manually raise, and you can use binary moray 3 times to play 3 cards with Reckless Experimentation, which will reduce your Honors Keesis.
Hmm. Yeah, very cool.
So, yeah,
One of these times we should play our Dark Tiding Hexads. Smash our Dark Tiding Hexads together.
that'd be awesome.
That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. This one did not make my Hexad for Dark Tidings, but
Wolf is in my Dark Tidings Hexad, so this one would make the cut for me. It's actually a pretty cool deck, Wolf the Electric. I've talked about it before as an example deck for some stuff, but yeah, a lot of pips, double device, and bursty potential. So was kind of an experiment deck to see if the devices and some house cheating and the archiving could work well enough together to be a thing. So it's fun.
yeah. Yeah, I see you got a Chronophage deck there too. I have I think a couple in my Hexad.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Cool. Well, folks,
Right,
thanks
man.
for hanging out on the stream, checking out the game, hanging out with us. A lot of fun, and I don't know, signing off.
Thanks for rigging the random access archives for me, DataForge stream. That was perfect. Just what I wanted.
Nice. Yeah, fun stuff. All right, folks. We'll see you around the lab. Have a good night.